Good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Joe.
Hey, it's nice running into you at Big Data London, and I think as a follow up, we decided to record a quick podcast here. So it's good to see you again.
No, it was great. I love Big Data London. It was my first time attending in person, and just seeing all the Zoom faces in person was great.
Do you have that too?
I do I'm like people. Wow, you're much taller than I expected. So that was great to see so many different friends and people that you work with or have normally just meetings with. So it's always great to have that collaborative conversation in person.
Yeah, absolutely. Felt that was a good conference too. A lot of people attended. It was packed to the gills for sure. And but I think it was definitely that wasn't a it didn't get in the way of either quality talks or quality discussions. Sort of in the vendor booths or the hallways, and so I thought it was good. So you give a talk there, right?
I did. I was giving a talk with the CDO of Schneider Electric.
Hmm.
He's a old contact of mine, and really talking about the balancing the efforts for an electrical company to have sustainability and to be very aware of the carbon footprint of data, um, and balancing that with the objectives of a data program, which is always to have high quality data, well governed data, and how do you protect and manage that data. So usually those are two separate topics. I don't hear uh, the combination of sustainability and good data governance together in the same sentence.
Yeah, I've actually never heard of that before in that combination. Why don't you walk me through that? Like, how does that work? How do you balance efforts for ESG, again against I guess the common objectives for data that.
Yeah, so this was actually a similar talk that I gave at the CDOIQ symposium, which was held in Boston in July. And this topic came about because more than a year ago, I was reading an article about the energy that is associated with data centers and the fact that they contributed to 0.1% of the carbon footprint. And it was also talking about the energy that is the energy that comes from like things, the computer, just like computers, laptops, all the hardware. If you think about all the technology that we use, um, actually becomes a very wasteful. And what can companies tangibly do? And I try to think of relating that to the data lifecycle management process, something that I'm very aware of, having done that previously in different financial services companies. And there's a key aspect to the data lifecycle that companies ignore. And that's the fact that companies hoard data, right? They like to keep data because they don't know how to delete it, they don't know when to delete it, but there are data policies that are clearly laid out that after a certain amount of years, you have to delete data. You have to delete the files. For example, there could be a specific policy that says after 10 years of an employee leaving a company, you should delete their resume. You should delete in the US, you should delete their 1099 forms, tax forms. You should delete all this paperwork related to employee after they've left the firm. So there are multitudes of these policies already in place, but what I see is that companies in regulated and non-regulated industries, there's no discrimination. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to meet those policies.
Hmm.
Technology teams have trouble finding the data that meets these policies. So what's the normal human behavior is to do nothing, right? Is to
Hmm.
keep the data. It's better do no harm, so they keep it. But that's where companies put themselves at risk, right? They put themselves at a higher vulnerability because they're exposing more data, personal information data out there where potential hackers could, find and where other employees could potentially utilize in a negative way. So it puts the security risk is much higher if you're storing and keeping more data than necessary. So the way that Roberto, the CDO of Schneider Electric, and I thought about this was the part about data deletion, data retention as a key aspect of data lifecycle management is something that organizations can manage and control today. And if they had a better handle on deleting their duplicate data, complying with their deletion policies, then they can say that they have a reduction in the data storage. They can have a clear way to measure the size of their footprint. So in a way, that is how they can help the environment.
That's an interesting connection. It never occurred to me that sort of traversing the impacts, right, of data hoarding to ESG. And I suppose that it should be obvious. The more data you're holding, there's probably some costs to that. There's obviously financial costs. How important are you finding the ESG discussion to companies that you talk with? Is this something that's top of mind, and they're trying to find ways to tweak their footprint, or walk me through that?
No, that's interesting. So the reason why I this was the second talk about ESG and data deletion I've done this year. Um, and I have to be honest, I'm fairly new to the ESG conversation,
Hmm.
but I think a lot of us are concerned with the environment. And I think this is a way for data practitioners to feel connected and to feel they can be empowered to do something to make a positive impact. Oftentimes, I think with sustainability and ESG, it's entirely different department or division in an organization that talks about it. But why not put some tangible ways for other departments and teams to make a contribution towards measuring themselves against ESG and sustainability? So I think in the concept of data deletion, companies should be better at retaining, thinking about what they retain, and also from security perspective, there's benefits and
Yeah.
privacy compliance requires you to only keep information that is needed and that you have approvals for. So Roberto actually gave really good example um, of how he inspired his team to take on this initiative. And I think it was just looking at the amount of emails that
Mm.
people have. And I think everyone today has multiple email addresses. Like for my personal email, I got like 4 or 5 different personal email addresses
Yeah.
dating back from my college years. Um, and then the amount of email and junk email that's just stored. Imagine it's the multitude of you multiply that by all the employees, and then the length of tenure in the organization. That if you can actually combine that size of the emails and then just say, hey, anything over 5 years or 2 years, even, just delete it and think about how much free space. So actually converting the size of this data to, to a dollar amount, as well as, time savings and the additional add-on processes that occurs because you're just holding on to so much data. Putting things into that perspective always helps with getting the executives on board with taking action.
Oh, for sure. If I'm looking at my iPhone right now, I have 122,314 unread emails.
Oh my goodness. Wow. And see, that would drive me crazy. I like to have all my emails open and read. So when, yeah, that would
I'm
you can
tempted to just hit all as read and just be done with it. That's
all
kind of
or
cheating
just delete
though,
them.
or just
Yeah,
delete them. Yeah, yeah. It's but I'm as guilty of hoarding as ever, right? It's like, well, you never know. You might need that archived email someday for Lord knows what purpose, right? But the probably 0% chance you will. That's symptomatic of the type of behavior you're talking about.
it is. So I actually read a great study by, again, the legal industry, and this is an example I gave in my talk. They have a responsibility to serve their clients, and that's their hesitation with deleting data. They never know if it could be cross referenced to another case, or if they need it somewhere, need it
Hmm.
another time. So that's why they keep and hoard all this data. But at the same time, they lack the knowledge around technology and around data management. Those are very important skill sets, and
Yeah,
I'm seeing, at least in the legal industry, a merging of these two disciplines. Like the legal industry and the data management industry is certainly coming together. And it's not just the regulated industries that benefit from good data management practices. I'm happy to see even the legal industry is benefiting and taking advantage of good data management practices.
yeah. And my sister's a lawyer, and it still boggles my mind that she still uses Word, like desktop
Wow.
version, and she still insists on using paper, which is the strangest thing I've ever seen. But back in the day, if companies I'd be involved with or work at, if they were involved in any litigation, they would just send a dumpster full of papers to whoever needed them and have fun going through all that.
Hmm.
And ask for an electronic copy, so we'll just give you a copy in the form of a semi
Exactly.
truck.
No, but if you think about, paper is really the biggest source of unstructured data that all
Mm,
companies, not just the legal industry, have. It's all the email communications.
yeah,
I use Slack at work. I'm sure companies use other instant messaging channels. So all that, again, contain, especially conversations between coworkers, that can contain sensitive client information, and if needed, has to be discovered in an audit or evidenced in any court cases. So that's where this uncertainty is also a big piece of the conversation here. Is companies don't know exactly what their data is, where it's residing, what data has the biggest
mm,
risk for them to take action on. Um, so again, it goes back to why organizations um, are not are not doing much with their data deletion, data retention program. It's very difficult problem for them to solve.
interesting. What are the biggest challenges that you see with data management right now?
Besides the usual, which has always been data quality, keeping up with the cleanliness of the data, um, being able to self-service data to business users, which means that technology teams should not be responsible for always gatekeeping the data. I think those have been traditional data management focus, and the traditional master data management, reference data management problems. I think the role of the chief data officer and the challenges that they face in more recent years is their responsibility has expanded to analytics, being ensuring that the quality of that data for analytics is also accurate. The timeliness of analytical reporting has to be important. It's their responsibility to do more of the not just the business intelligence reporting, but also like a lot of the data modeling and the predictive analytics, which is key to supporting the business problems. And now, just more recently, is this talk about AI, which we all know is fueled by data. So that's where I think data management comes. becomes even more important, right? To ensure the trustworthiness of AI. So these are all evolving responsibilities and expanding responsibilities of the data leader in the organization.
I mean, I imagine you speak to a lot of CDOs. Um, from the outside in, it seems like it's one of those positions that's very. It seems very turbulent, right? I think the average lifespan of CDOs seems it's still to be determined, but it's still a bit light compared to more traditional roles. Why do you think that is?
No, that's an interesting question. I think, as you said, the average tenure is probably a little less than 3 years. I
Yeah.
think that's the quote. I, I think the challenge is that every organization in every industry has a different expectation and understanding of what a chief data officer is responsible for, right? I think if you hire a chief technology officer or a chief security officer or even a chief financial officer, it's very clear in the mind of the board that the financial officer is responsible for the revenue and for the financial statements of the company, and these are his or her responsibilities. It's
Right.
very clear. But the role of a chief data officer is more relatively new. I think it hasn't been popular until like last 20, 25 years, and that's relatively new, right? And depending on the maturity of the organization, they may put the chief data officer under technology, right?
Mm,
And their responsibility is limited to a technology scope in terms of ensuring that the SLA between the data moves between applications on time, or the risk, or ensuring the quality of the data within the tables is accurate and complete. So their function has also been limited because of who they report to in the organization. Ideally, a chief data officer, if they are positioned well, is in a more business focused role, meaning they can report directly to the CEO, the chief executive officer, or even directly to a risk officer or operations officer. And that gives them more oversight onto the business and be able to dictate the proper usage of data in the business side. And the technology officer would then be their peer in ensuring that the technology can support the data strategy that the CDO has put together. So that is a very advanced type of thinking when it comes to an organization to do such a organizational
yeah.
restructure. Um, so to answer your question specifically, I believe the short tenure is based on the fact that there's a miscommunication between what's expected and also not fully understanding the time it takes to actually unravel a lot of the technical debt that organizations need to be ready for good data management. It takes time, right? It takes almost up to a year for chief data officers to get the right budget, to get the right funding, to hire the right people, to sign on and onboard a vendor. So that takes up a third of the time. And maybe within the next 6 months, they can start to um, figure out their plan and maybe onboard a vendor and implement a data quality program. But to actually show the true business value, they need to ensure that what they're doing and their scope of work meets a business need. And not all business teams in an organization is able to articulate what their data pain points
Mm,
are. And if it doesn't actually, save the company money or have some significant ROI within 8 to 12 months, then that chief data officer is on his or her way out.
It seems like that. That's what I've been observing as well. And it's not like these CDOs come into the job saying like I'm totally gonna fail. I mean, I think, and it's not like people hire them with that expectation, right? So it's a bit disappointing. But I mean, if you were to imagine what the perfect scenario is for a CDO to come in and succeed, what would that be?
Um, I think there has to be the full support of the board to guarantee that the chief data officer um, can do his or her job for a minimum of 5 years. I mean, I think that's the minimum it needs to completely transform the technology suite, revamp the data tech stack to from end to end, right? We're talking about from the data sources, the re-architecting, down to like the way that dashboards are being built and how business teams are using the data. So that certainly takes time. There needs to be the right effort to fund these initiatives, right? And also make them appear to the lines of business and to
Mhm.
technology officers. So having them have an equal seat in the table, along with the security officer, privacy officer, this has to be a very equal um, standing. So that's
Yeah.
just the minimum in terms of organizational structure. These need to be in place in order for any success to
Hmm.
happen.
Interesting. Yeah, it tends to jive with what I've been seeing too. I think a friend of mine, he put a LinkedIn post up yesterday where he said when data people attend meetings, they shouldn't be the special guest at the meeting. Right?
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of the clown that shows up to the birthday party and does a few tricks and leaves. But that's sadly some of the reality. In some companies, is we have the data person here, and it's the equal seat at the table. I think is something that definitely rings. It definitely checks pretty hard. So
Oh, well, yeah, I agree. And again, not all organizations are at a maturity level where they can hire a chief data officer,
right,
right? They may be fine with having a technology officer also serve as a data leader. And I'm not advocating that all companies
right,
have someone like this title, right? Because it comes with certain level of responsibilities. So at lower maturity companies, it's okay to combine the role, but as long as there's someone that can dictate the right data strategy and implement the right data principles in management, um, that is what counts at the end of the day. Or it's not always about the titles here, right? It's about someone
yeah,
who is ultimately responsible, though. Like, who would a CEO call at night if there's a problem with the number in his dashboard that he's saying, like, this number is off? Who would the CFO call, right, if the revenue numbers are off?
hmm
Someone at the end of the day does need to be responsible. Who is building your internal chat GPTs?
mm,
Who's doing that? So by asking these type of questions to a company that may not be as mature, it leads them to the right direction. Like, aha, maybe I do need to make someone responsible, and then they need to identify who that is in that organization.
you mentioned this word mature. It's an interesting word, and I think data maturity is a it's an interesting topic in itself. It's one of these things where I feel like we have different maturity curves, different maturity profiles for companies. But what's been your experience with identifying whether or not a company is mature with data or ready to embark on a serious data project, i.e., something that's going to move the needle for their business?
So there's different maturity frameworks out there. Certainly, the most original one is the capabilities maturity model that was built by Carnegie Mellon. Started out more on the manufacturing industry side of things, but there are different maturity models that I've seen For example, the EDM Council has a DCAM, data capabilities assessment maturity. There's West Monroe has one, Gartner has one. There's many out there. They all focus on components of data analytics. They all have a slightly different weighting towards maybe AI and analytics, which I think is actually very interesting.
Mm.
Um, but the basic components are contain what is just an assessment of what organizations have today in terms of people, process, and technologies, and this could include what processes are agreed upon or are done currently today, um, size of the team, the maturity of the team. Some people may hire very experienced data leaders, so that affects the scoring.
Mm.
What is the partnership like between data and technology teams today? What type of working groups or councils? How do data issues get resolved and fixed today? So there's a whole myriad of questions that just assess like what is being done today in terms of data. And then it's also very important from a maturity level, what do organizations want out of their data? And I think that this is where clear goals and KPIs around things like um, fewer data quality issues or faster and more accurate analytics reporting or more data needed for reporting purposes. So there's very specific outcomes that the business and the data teams are looking for. And if they can articulate it in a way, they can tie it to how their data program looks today. And hopefully that gap isn't too big. But in order for them to be mature, most of these frameworks rate you from a scale of 1 to 3. I
Yeah.
think that most organizations are about a 2, average about 2 across all industries, right? Even I think financial services has been known to be more advanced, and
Right.
maybe they might be more of a 3. But very few companies are fully mature and advanced, and that's a 4 or 5, where everything is not just repeatable, but they can be predictive as well in knowing their data issues. That's very rare. The goal obviously is to at least reach a minimal of 3, and then improve upon there.
Hmm. That's really interesting. And what was it yesterday? I think Wall Street Journal had an article about how a lot of CEOs are pushing their CIOs and other people responsible for data to jump into generative AI.
Mhm.
Does jumping into generative AI does that make you mature as a company?
I mean, I think everybody wants to jump onto the bandwagon, right? There's certainly this hype cycle around
Yeah.
generative AI. I think in theory, anyone can do it, right? You just buy the open source software and build it. The challenge or the issue becomes, how are you building the large language models, or maybe not large language models? Like, how are you building language models with your existing data? Great. Where is your existing data?
Hmm.
It's all
Right.
over the place. So the quality is not great. So I think everyone is excited and there's a lot of potential. Absolutely. Is it going to be a game changer? Absolutely. But can all organizations fully utilize it and get solid, dependable results? Mm, no, I don't think so. Not if they don't already have a good handle
Mm.
on their data. I mean, yes, you can feed it with a limited data set that you curated, but in order to fully take advantage of a chatbot, you need to feed it with more information. And this means they need to be able to look at unstructured data, again, which is the trickiest and hardest data type
Hmm.
to govern. It's the format is not something you can standardize. It's very difficult for organizations to ensure that they are not putting sensitive and confidential information. So that's why they can't just upload all everything they have in their
Yeah.
drives into this chatbot. They have to do it with caution.
Oh yeah, and even if you're chatting with these chatbots too, if you let even subtle things, you're not naming names, right? But you're saying, here's the context of my company, hypothetically, and people could probably infer that if they knew you're who you were, right? Just look at your LinkedIn and say, oh yeah, Peggy, she's obviously talking about this company here. We'll learn more about it. But it's an interesting one. I mean, what are your thoughts on data management in a world of unstructured data? Because I think so far data management has, if you go back and, like Damo, for example, it's been very much focused on structured data, enterprise data. Now we're living in a world where there's images, video,
Yeah.
text, who knows what else, that's going to be front and center with these generative AI applications. What are your thoughts on data management with unstructured data?
Well, I can tell you, as a former data practitioner, unstructured data used to be considered out of scope. And that's a terrible thing to say. It's like out of scope. We're ignoring it. That's how hard, large, and confusing it is. Let's ignore the problem. Hopefully it goes away. But obviously we're realizing you can't do that anymore. But this is where I'm very excited about, AI and machine learning can really help start to govern the unstructured data. And the biggest risk is one, I need to be able to inventory my unstructured data. So, short of someone manually collecting and building a library, this you can use technology for curations. It's easy, right? I think it's easy. The second piece, when it comes to data management, data governance, is what data, what business attributes are actually inside this document. And then the follow up question is, does this document contain personal information like someone's social security number that I need to make sure I redact or mask? Again, good news is that there's technology solutions that are very good at being able to identify based on the data type and looking inside the document, looking at the metadata and the data itself, and say, okay, this looks like a boarding document. This looks like a resume, and look inside and say, okay, inside this resume has someone's name and address, and let's put it at a higher security level so that the company makes sure it doesn't get exposed to the larger firm, to all the employees, or the access control should only be limited to human resources, right? Because they're the only ones. Um, the third piece, which I have not seen anyone break through, and if I'm proven wrong, I would love to be proven wrong. If there's a new vendor out there that can actually do data quality on unstructured, I think that is for me, that is the nirvana of those three things: the inventorying, the classification, sensitivity identification, and then being able to do data quality on unstructured data. Wow, that
Yeah.
is amazing, because you're tying the unstructured data value to a structured value, comparing it and ensuring that one, it's mastered correctly, it's within the right data quality rules. Ew. My mind will be blown seriously if that is possible. I
I mean,
haven't.
given the activity in the space, it's bound to happen, right? Or I'm sure somebody's working on it right now. Yeah, I have some friends who are working on stuff with unstructured data. I'll need to ask them if they go on the quality route, because it seemed like what they were doing was definitely tangential to it. So like I think it was archiving or something like that. But yeah, don't go back and look. If it is what I think it is, I'll send it over to you.
Yeah, no,
So
absolutely.
yeah,
Or if any of your listeners,
yeah,
um, again, power of crowdsourcing, right? Let's
yep,
if I think that I'll just say I think there's so VCs should back should back that company up. But
yeah,
the reason why it's so important is even if companies don't have data management programs, they value their data quality, right? So if there's unstructured data that can validate and ensure um, the accuracy of a number in an email, can validate the accuracy or disqualify the accuracy of a table or a dashboard number and be able to cross-reference that, um, that would take data quality management to a whole nother level.
oh yeah,
But the reason why it's so difficult is that it's all about context,
yeah,
right? You're not going to just take a random number that you see in an email. It has to be, if it's going to be something like a portfolio revenue, net revenue number, it has to be in that right context of the same time period or the same portfolio. So just can't be looking at just the metadata value. So
right,
I think that's the hardest part, and that's where again, right now, it gets validated by humans, right? The data steward or someone on the business or data team manually validates this information, which is great. I think that's like the 20% rule, right? 80%, I believe, can be done with technology in terms of classifying, tagging, labeling. But the 20% rule now is, I think, with the data where the data quality aspect lies. So that if that can be, that 20% can be reduced down to like 5%, I think just exponentially, the speed of um, the accuracy and just the fact that data management is so iterative, and the more iterations you can do on the same data set just makes the quality of that data set better. And it's all about time to speed, right? So I think people are expecting generative AI to be accurate all the time. And how can you do that if your data set isn't even refreshed and the data quality isn't reviewed and cleaned up on time as well? So I
yeah.
think it's all about, we're talking about, instead of weeks and days, we're talking about like hours and minutes where we want
Mhm.
the data to be accurate and clean.
Oh yeah, I mean, as I've said in my talks, like, I spoke about this in my keynote at Big Data London too. The rise of AI, at least this time around, hopefully it's a forcing function for the boring stuff that we've somehow put off. Just like we put off good hygiene and good habits as people sometimes. But the boring stuff is what's going to make this work, right? Data management, governance, quality, modeling, and so forth. Whether that's structured data, unstructured data, that to me it doesn't really matter. But these practices are really what's going to make it work in the enterprise. So, for example, right, the question I always ask my audience when I give talks is, um, today, if you were to stick a large language model on top of your corporate data set, would you do that? But also, would you bet your job on this if it didn't work? And if I gave you a 100% pay raise next year, that's your reward for it, or maybe more. But um, even so, nobody raises their hand except for one of my friends who was doing that at her job, but she knew the data really well. But I think a lot of us want to talk about this stuff, but to do it in practice right now, I don't think anyone's going to bet the career on it, and that's the gap that we're looking at, right? It's I think we want to, but I mean, I've worked in machine learning for a long time, and it's just one of those things where uh, most company data sets are an absolute hellscape, to put it politely. So it's you can barely do business intelligence on this stuff half the time, let alone sticking a LLM on top of it. I don't know.
I completely agree with you, and I hope that the general public is. I think the difference here is the general public is also embracing or
Yeah,
being educated around generative AI. They see what it can do from a personal perspective, and inside companies, corporations, there's more education, not just within the data technology team. What is generative AI? I think everyone, hopefully by now, has heard of ChatGPT and all the other models out there.
Hmm.
So I compare that to, I think about this as like carrot and stick, right? Is generative AI enough of a carrot?
Hmm.
And what has been the carrot and stick in the past, at least for financial services, has been regulations,
Right.
compliance. It's been more of a stick, right? Let's push this along to let's use a stick to nudge us along to do better data management. I was very excited about 5, 7 years ago with GDPR, and
Hmm.
that's the General Data Protection Regulation in EU, and in the United States. Certainly, we have several states have, most prominently California, led by
Right.
California, on protection rights. Um, I was very excited about that because not only was good data management good only for financially regulated industries, but all companies of certain size has to understand what sense what private data they are collecting on their customers and employees, and be mindful of that. So for me, 5 years ago, that did nudge companies to do and think about governance, right? It educated the privacy teams, the chief privacy officers, and people that are lawyers. Think about data governance. Now they were talking to me about data mapping, business glossary, and data quality. Wow, it's like, that's fantastic. You're a lawyer, I'm a data practitioner. Let's talk about this. Like, we had something in common, and we were aligned in the goals. But that still left out most of the organization, right? If I was only
Yeah.
talking to privacy people. Um, and certainly, security people think about security risk all the time, but that's still a very small segment. So I am hoping that with more time on generative AI, the power of it can allow more business teams in the organization to really embrace it. Um, but in order for that to fully happen, that's where the executives, the technology teams,
Yeah.
CISOs, CDOs, all need to come together and realize, um, there has to be the guardrails in place, and
Hmm.
we just can't. There's no point in having this shiny tool, shiny magic tool, if it actually doesn't work, right?
Yep.
Um, so that's a sad thing. It's like buying a new Lamborghini, and the engine isn't there, right? The data isn't there to actually fuel it and run it. So
Yeah. Yeah. It runs on like a hamster wheel inside the engine. Well, yeah, I'm fascinated to see what happens with the EU AI Act. I mean, that's supposed to be voted on at least by middle of December, because everyone has to excuse himself for the holiday. I think at the very latest it'll be voted on by then. That's very much an exercise. I mean, if you thought GDPR was interesting, I mean, this makes that look pretty mild by comparison. I mean, because you're trying to anticipate future use cases that probably aren't here yet, and
mhm.
so it's. I've talked to several people who are working on the act, and it's never a dull moment in the EU these days.
No, they're leading the way, I think,
Yeah.
when it comes to a lot of this. And then, I think about what are we doing? Are we doing enough here in the United
Mm.
States? Are we having the right conversations? Are we moving fast enough?
Do you think we
And
are?
yes, I don't think we are, but again, I think we're not, because we just don't have the right educated people making the decisions, right? That's my personal opinion.
I agree. So,
But I think the uncertainty is, it's almost like analysis paralysis. Again, a very common data term, but I feel like, are we just doing all these? I mean, listening to all the congressional hearings,
mm,
and they're listening to all these experts, but at some point in time, like, you just need to take some action. And the more that we talk about the potential threats of not having these laws in place, it's just going to become a reality. These
mm.
fears will will actually become reality. Um, but let's put a stake in the ground and work from there. It's growing, iterative, evolving process. Let's evolve with. Let's we have to ensure whatever regulation you have will evolve as well.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess to cap it off and kind of loop it back, what are your thoughts on the impacts of AI on ESG, right? 'Cause you're talking about significantly larger data sets than, you know, so video is going to be substantially larger than text data, and everything's larger than structured data, which is pretty small by comparison. And then you have the side effects. I wouldn't say the side effects, just the reality that they have to train these things on GPUs, which are notorious for consuming a ton of power. So
Yeah.
how would you want to frame the ESG discussion we started with that reality?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think that's a balance we need to take, right? Especially um, AI requires more data for computing. Um, so I mean I think that's a pretty tough one on specifically if AI it's just a natural part of the data consumption that's already going
Hmm.
to happen. um, what are the ways that companies can think about reducing their data footprint? um, it's a good question. I
Yeah.
that can be some that should be something that should be relevant to talk about.
Yeah. Well, food for thought if we meet up in person next time. So it's
Think of
yeah.
some ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's definitely one of the. I mean, if you just looked at the amount of uh, resources that took that even ChatGPT or GPT-4, used to train, that's not a godly amount of everything. So,
Yeah.
and I live in Utah where there's I don't even know how many data centers we have, and we live in a desert where we don't have a lot of water. I think the state government's like, oh, tax breaks for sure. We have the NSA, we have Facebook, we have Google. I think there's
Mm,
several others here as well, and but it's a lot of resources. I don't know how they cool
wow.
these things, but um, it's pretty
I hope
fascinating.
it's all solar powered or wind powered data centers.
I'm in Utah. I wish they would do that too, but that's a story for another
Oh,
day. Fun. Well, it was great chatting with you, and like I said, it was great running into you. I'd seen you a ton on LinkedIn. As pleasantly surprised to hang out with you for a bit. But good
no, it
deal.
was great to finally meet you in
Yeah,
person as well.
yeah,
I follow you as well on LinkedIn.
yeah,
Great content, and it's great that you have these podcasts and share more of these and amplify these ideas with your audience. So yeah, happy to do this.
yeah. For people who want to learn more about you or what you're up to, how can they do that?
So they can find me on LinkedIn, and that is really my main social um,
Okay,
handle at this point. Yeah.
cool, awesome. I'll put that in the show notes. Well, Peggy, it's been terrific talking to you. So have a great evening. Talk to you
Thank you,
soon. Yeah,
Joe.
thank you. Thanks. Just